They once called him Australia's most unforgettable face. Wild-eyed, unpredictable, a madman with a football and a microphone. But behind the loud voice, the outrageous stunts, and the Energizer battery commercials, there was a man spiraling out of control. What if fame didn't just amplify his eccentricity, but actually destroyed him? Before Mark Jacko Jackson vanished from the spotlight, he left behind a trail of broken relationships, half professional burnouts, and one confession that hinted at a lifetime of regret. "They never understood me," he once said. "They just wanted to watch me burn." It wasn't just a cry for help. It was a window into the chaotic world of a man who couldn't turn off the performance, even when it was killing him inside. From the brutal playing fields of 1980s Aussie rules football to the glittery chaos of pop music and TV fame, Jacko's rise was meteoric and messy. He called himself an individual, but few realized how lonely that title truly was. His outrageous behavior made headlines, punching teammates, getting kicked off teams, mocking authority, and Australians either loved him or loathed him. But no one ignored him. Yet beneath the surface of his rock star persona, Jacko was a man battling inner demons, a volatile temper, a craving for acceptance, and the crushing pressure to keep performing long after the audience had moved on. What really happened when the cameras stopped rolling? Why did one of Australia's most recognizable stars fall so hard, so fast? This is not just a story about football, music, or fame. This is about the man who became a caricature of himself and what it cost him. In the testosterone-fueled world of 1980s Australian rules football, Mark Jacko Jackson stood out like a neon flare in a fog of conformity. This was an era dominated by hard tackles, cold beers, and tougher-than-nails locker room codes. Most players kept their heads down, respected their coaches, and avoided stirring the pot. But not Jacko. He wasn't just a player, he was a spectacle. And for a while, Australia couldn't look away. Born in 1959 in Melbourne, Jacko had all the physical traits of a promising footballer. Athletic, aggressive, and fearless. But what made him unforgettable wasn't his game, it was his defiance. He played for several VFL clubs, St Kilda, Melbourne, and Geelong, but never stayed long. Behind the scenes, he clashed with coaches, challenged authority, and often brought chaos into the locker room. There were rumors of him throwing punches at teammates, refusing to follow tactics, and storming out mid-season. To some, he was a rebel. To others, a ticking time bomb. By the mid-1980s, Jacko's football career was more famous for headlines than highlights. Yet, just when the sports world thought it had seen the last of him, he re-emerged, not in a jersey, but on a stage. In 1985, he released the single "I'm an Individual," a brash, punk-spirited anthem that mocked conformity and soared to number 15 on the Australian charts. The song wasn't just catchy, it became a cultural moment, a loud middle finger to the establishment, wrapped in Jacko's trademark snarl. From there, he morphed into a commercial icon. Cast as the manic spokesman for Energizer batteries in a series of internationally broadcast ads, Jacko became a pop culture figure beyond the field. His face, voice, and larger-than-life attitude were suddenly everywhere. America took notice. He even landed a brief role in a short-lived US TV show, The Highwayman, starring alongside Sam J. Jones. For a working-class Aussie athlete, it was a dizzying leap into global fame. But while the world laughed at Jacko's antics, few realized the toll it was taking. His rise was built not on steady success, but on shock value. Every outburst, every controversy, every punchline, they were all fuel for a persona that became impossible to sustain. He had turned himself into a character, and the real man behind it was slowly disappearing. By the late 1980s, the cracks began to show. Tabloids began to circle. There were stories of bar fights, alienated friends, and growing instability. His fame, once electric, began to feel toxic. Those who once cheered now rolled their eyes. The public had moved on, but Jacko hadn't. And it's here, at the height of his transformation from sports rebel to media clown, that the real story begins. What happens to someone who becomes famous for being unfiltered when the world no longer wants to hear what he has to say? Mark Jacko Jackson's rise wasn't smooth. It was explosive, chaotic, and unapologetically loud. From the moment he first stepped onto a VFL field, it was clear he wasn't just there to play. He was there to shake things up. His football career began with St Kilda in 1981. On paper, he had everything. raw talent, physical dominance, and a keen eye for goals. But within weeks, whispers started to circulate. Jacko wasn't like the others. He argued with coaches, disobeyed game plans, and challenged anyone who tried to rein him in. When most rookies were trying to fit in, Jacko was doing everything he could to stand out, and not always in the right way. After a short stint at St. Kilda, he bounced to Melbourne, then Geelong. Each move was punctuated by flare-ups and fallout. At Geelong, despite kicking 115 goals in 2 seasons, a remarkable achievement, he was considered too volatile to keep. There were locker room confrontations, public criticisms of management, and a constant sense of disruption. But fans? They couldn't get enough. Jacko had become a cult figure. He was unpredictable, aggressive, and oddly magnetic. As his football reputation burned hot and fast, Jacko saw something most athletes didn't: the power of spectacle. In 1985, when he released I'm an Individual, it wasn't just a song, it was a declaration. The music video, filled with absurd dance moves, wild expressions, and a sneering chorus, became a national sensation. Kids sang it in schoolyards. Adults laughed or groaned. But everyone knew who Jacko was. This was the turning point. He had crossed into entertainment, and there he found a new kind of fame. He followed up with Me Brain Hurts and launched into the advertising world, becoming the face of Energizer batteries. His loud, manic delivery, "Oi, Energizer, oi," was unforgettable. Jacko had gone global, shouting his way into homes from Australia to the United States. The media ate it up. He appeared on talk shows, posed for bizarre magazine covers, and even dabbled in acting. In The Highwayman, an American action series, Jacko played Jacko, a boisterous Aussie sidekick with explosive energy and little subtlety. The show flopped, but Jacko's presence was undeniable. For a working-class kid from Melbourne, it was surreal, from footy fields to Hollywood. But the same forces that propelled him upward were also unraveling him. Behind the scenes, the pressure to be Jacko, not Mark Jackson, but the brand, grew suffocating. He was expected to be outrageous, to perform, to never switch off. And when he wasn't loud enough, the cameras turned away. Friends began to notice changes. He became increasingly erratic, swinging between bursts of manic enthusiasm and deep frustration. Reports of aggressive behavior surfaced. There were claims he alienated colleagues, clashed with directors, and burned bridges at a dizzying pace. In interviews, his answers grew more unhinged, sometimes bordering on incoherent. But audiences kept watching, half in amusement, half in disbelief. Eventually, even the advertisers backed off. What once made Jacko a marketing goldmine now made him a liability. Rumors swirled: bar fights, lawsuits, unpaid debts, and behind-the-scenes meltdowns. The more he tried to stay in the spotlight, the more it seemed to slip through his fingers. His attempts to reinvent himself as a musician, a comedian, a TV personality never quite landed. He was no longer a football star, no longer a pop novelty, and too volatile for sustained work. By the early 90s, the man who once dominated headlines had become a punchline himself. And yet, through it all, Jacko insisted he was misunderstood. He blamed the media, the clubs, the sponsors. "They created me," he once said, "then crucified me for being exactly what they wanted." But the truth, as we'll soon see, runs deeper. Because behind the wild eyes and loud voice was a man who didn't just lose control of his career, he lost control of himself. By the time the spotlight began to dim, Mark "Jacko" Jackson was no longer the man Australia had cheered or mocked. He had become something else entirely, a walking contradiction. Larger than life, yet increasingly invisible. Famous, yet forgotten. The man who once shouted, "I'm an individual," had become a cautionary tale of what happens when the performance never ends. The years following his peak were marked by growing instability. He gave increasingly erratic interviews, often rambling or shifting tone from humor to rage in a matter of seconds. There were whispers of mental health issues, though Jacko never publicly acknowledged them in any traditional way. Instead, he doubled down on the persona, masking any signs of struggle with more bluster. One particularly revealing interview came in the late 1990s, when he snapped at a reporter mid-conversation and muttered, "You don't get it, do you? This isn't an act. This is all I've got left." It was a rare glimpse into the exhaustion behind the mania. A man who had built an empire of noise but now lived in silence. Privately, his relationships were disintegrating. Longtime friends distanced themselves. There were stories of unpaid debts, of bitter fallouts over money and pride. He was sued more than once. And yet, Jacko continued to appear in small-scale projects, often as a caricature of his former self. A cameo here, a reality TV bit there. Always loud, always wild. But the sparkle was gone. Perhaps the darkest chapter came when he turned on his own legend. In 2002, Jacko released a book filled with wild claims, including that he was a victim of systemic betrayal by the media and sporting industry. He alleged conspiracies, sabotage, and even hinted that powerful forces had blacklisted him from major platforms. Critics dismissed it as delusion, but others wondered, was this the unraveling of a man who had spent 2 decades being told to be outrageous and was now paying the price? Media responses were brutal. Sad, some wrote. A former icon begging for relevance. One headline read, "From hero to headache, what happened to Jacko?" Public sentiment shifted from curiosity to discomfort. People didn't know whether to laugh or feel sorry, but those closest to him told a more nuanced story. Former teammates described Jacko as deeply insecure, someone who craved approval but didn't know how to ask for it. A former producer recalled a moment when Jacko, alone backstage, whispered, "They only love me when I shout." It wasn't a joke, it was a confession. There were periods of reclusion where he vanished from the public entirely. Some said he moved into a quiet coastal town, avoiding media and turning his back on fame. Others claimed he tried to restart old business ventures, only to burn bridges once again with unpredictable behavior. And then came the darkest twist. A recorded outburst in 2015, where Jacko was caught on video delivering an aggressive, borderline incoherent tirade outside a pub. The footage went viral, not because it was funny, but because it was disturbing. This wasn't the wild, cheeky Jacko of the 80s. This was a man unraveling in public. People no longer laughed, they looked away. Despite this, Jacko never apologized. He never softened. In rare appearances, he maintained that the world had misunderstood him, that his downfall was engineered by a society that couldn't handle honesty. But honesty had long since been drowned out by noise. The tragedy isn't just that Jacko fell, it's that he may have never known how to stop performing. His entire identity had been built on being outrageous, offensive, unpredictable. And when the world moved on, he was left alone on stage, screaming into the dark. This was the dark truth. Jacko wasn't a villain. He was a man devoured by the very character he created. And no one, not the media, not the public, not even Jacko himself, knew how to save what was left. Mark Jacko Jackson is one of those rare figures who challenges the very definition of celebrity. Was he a genius of self-promotion, or simply a man who couldn't control his own image? Was he ahead of his time, an early example of what happens when shock becomes currency, or was he just a product of his environment, a loud voice in a culture that rewarded noise over nuance? At Aussie Uncovered, we believe Jacko is both a cautionary tale and a cultural icon. His football achievements are often overshadowed by the antics that followed, but they should not be forgotten. On the field, he was bold, fearless, and undeniably skilled. His 115 goals for Geelong in just 2 seasons proved that behind the chaos was a legitimate athlete with incredible potential. But Jacko wasn't built for quiet success. He craved impact, and he got it. For better or worse, he changed the landscape of Australian pop culture. He blurred the lines between athlete, entertainer, and provocateur. In many ways, Jacko predicted the era of reality TV, social media influencers, and viral fame. He was doing in the 80s what many chase today: instant attention, maximum reaction. Yet the price he paid is undeniable. His story reveals the dangers of turning oneself into a brand, especially when that brand is built on controversy. The louder he became, the more he lost himself. Fame for Jacko wasn't just fleeting, it was corrosive. He couldn't step away from the spotlight because he had nowhere else to go. The man and the persona fused into one combustible identity. And still, there's something tragically compelling about him. Unlike polished celebrities who hide their flaws, Jacko laid everything bare. He was raw, unfiltered, often offensive, but also painfully human. In his defiance, there was a vulnerability. In his arrogance, a desperation to matter. We don't excuse his behavior. He hurt people. He burned bridges. He leaned into stereotypes and at times reveled in being offensive. But we can't ignore that some of those flames were fueled by a culture that cheered while he self-destructed. What do you think? Was Jacko a misunderstood rebel or a self-made disaster? Did the media crucify him, or did he light the match himself? Can we still admire his cultural impact while acknowledging the damage left behind? Mark Jacko Jackson's legacy is not simple. It's messy, uncomfortable, and impossible to forget. And maybe that, in the end, is exactly what he wanted. In the end, Mark Jacko Jackson didn't fade away. He simply stopped being heard. The man who once shouted his way into every living room in Australia now lives in echoes. Memories half forgotten, punchlines rarely told, and a silence that feels louder than all his past noise. He hasn't had a major public appearance in years. Some say he's still out there somewhere, still carrying the fire, still waiting for one more chance to be seen. Others believe he's finally at peace, far from the glare of cameras that never really loved him to begin with. But Jacko's story isn't just about fame or failure. It's about the kind of fame that burns too hot, the kind that doesn't come with instruction manuals, only expectations. And what happens when the world laughs with you until it starts laughing at you? Even now, clips of "I'm an Individual" still pop up on YouTube. Old fans share stories of his wildest matches, his craziest interviews, his most unforgettable moments. There's a strange affection in those memories, not quite admiration, not quite mockery. Something else. Something like nostalgia for a time when being wild wasn't a brand. It was just who you were. Jacko was never built for the quiet life. But in a strange way, his silence now speaks volumes about how we treat our icons, about the danger of making someone a symbol before they've figured out who they really are, about how the same public that cheers you on can turn just as quickly. Some stories are never told, but now you know. He might never return to the spotlight, and maybe that's for the best. But for those who remember, Mark Jacko Jackson will always be more than just a footballer, more than just a pop song, more than just a madman on TV. He was the sound and fury of a generation. And when the shouting stopped, all that remained was the silence we didn't know what to do with. And in that silence, he became legend.